If you have an RD mind, you have a lot of thoughts going on at once, which is why it's hard to focus. Hello, this episode is about the RD mind, or how ADHD is actually a regulation difference, what I call the RD mind. Now, my background is more than 20 years as a psychotherapist, all that time specializing in ADHD or ADD. It's the same thing, known as both. And through that time, I've realized through decades of working with people and doing the research and trying to understand what's going on, that it's a regulation difference in the brain. It is not a disorder, it is a difference. It's a regulation difference in neurological activity. So there are two reasons I get to this, two main reasons I get to this conclusion, and I talk about this now all the time with my patients. The first is, 15 years ago I was talking to someone and it came to me to ask her, how many things in your mind right now? And she rolled her eyes and said, so many. And I said, well, that's interesting. Let's talk about that some more. So basically, what I realized then and forever since is that if you have this thing called ADHD, this diagnosis, but I call it RD, regulation difference. If you have an RD mind, you have a lot of thoughts going on at once, which is why it's hard to focus. You don't have less of an ability to focus. You have so many thoughts going on in your brain, your mind, it's hard to focus on one unless you're really engaged in it. Anyway, so that's the first evidence I had, and I've continued to get from people all the time, is there are many thoughts going on at once. The second point of evidence that points to a regulation difference is that when we take a medication for the RD mind, your RD mind, whether it's Adderall or Ritalin or something like that, it increases regulation because we know that these stimulants, these medication, cause more dopamine and norepinephrine to be flowing through the brain. And we know that, when I say we, the scientists tell us, we know that these two brain chemicals have different purposes in the brain or neurological system, but one of their purposes is regulation, brain regulation. Regulation basically of itself. These chemicals are part of the whole thing of the brain and neurological system. And when we increase the amount of that in the synapses, these points where the neurons connect and communicate, people suddenly experience fewer thoughts, less emotion, less behavior. They just do. Every time, for a period of time, whether it's 4 hours, 6 hours, or 8 hours, it's a temporary increase in neurological regulation. So those are the two reasons why I believe this is a regulation difference and how I approach it now as a clinician, and I will over the next 8 episodes. This thing we call ADHD, we've diagnosed as ADHD, is not a disorder, it is a difference. And basically, the human brain is around 88 billion neurons. And someone counted them one day, well, it's a heck of a long scientific process. Anyway, estimated 88 billion neurons with trillions of connections. So if you watch my hands, it's huge. So it has to regulate itself. Otherwise, nothing would happen. Now, this is every brain of every animal on the planet, not just the human brain, but we're focusing right now on you and me, the human brain. And so with such a huge brain and connections, it has to regulate itself. But what we call ADHD or ADD is basically, instead of regulating at this amount of activity level, it's a little bit less regulation and a little bit more activity level, neurologically speaking. That's it. It's a regulation difference causing more of neurological activity. It's as simple as that. That is the basis of everything. It's like the center of the universe for understanding your RD mind. Right there. Everything comes from there. Gifts and challenges, everything comes from that. So again, that little bit less regulation results in more thinking, more feeling, and more doing. And they correspond with the criteria that we have for ADHD in the diagnostic book. More thinking is inattentiveness, and more feeling is impulsivity, and more doing is hyperactivity or restlessness. So the next several episodes are all about this, the gifts and challenges, how to utilize the gifts, meet the challenges, and go from there. It's a different life in this understanding. So again, watch the next several episodes to get the full understanding that I'm describing about the RD mind. And I hope this has been helpful, because you deserve it and you are awesome.